Started. Quick content. We'll have a brief introduction, then we'll move on to the research gap, method, result, and the most important part, the discussion and the conclusion, which I think is what you all came. So, quick introduction. As we all know, food security is a very important. Is on everybody's agenda, but it's currently facing challenges such as climate change, land degradation, the growth of population, more precisely the middle class population, which therefore means there will be increase in high nutritious food demand, and we're losing agricultural land also to urbanization. Therefore, researchers are looking for alternatives and way to combat this, and a technique that has come out of it is urban agriculture. So urban agriculture in a general definition can be defined as growing or raising food within the urban area limit. So it can be found through many forms such as allotment farming, rooftop farming, peri-urban farming, vertical farming, and Z farming. However, we'll focus more on vertical farming, but it's interesting to know that techniques such as rooftop farming or Z farming do use or fall in the criteria that is vertical farming, as they commonly use the simple criteria, that is stacking on top of another. Also, once again, vertical farming and in urban agriculture in general do differ. You have some that use more conventional agriculture techniques, such as allotment farming, or more controlled environment. Vertical farming can use both, but we will mainly focus on the one that uses controlled environment agriculture, so controlled environment farming. So where did that lead us? That leads us to establishing our research gap. So I was looking more into vertical farming and the controlled environment. And what I commonly found when I was doing my lit review before starting my research is a lot of the literature is based on what is vertical farming and what it brings to the table, what its vertical farming's production on an economic and environmental impact perspective, and just literature illustrating the technology used with CA. So for example, explaining the new LEDs that are being used, etc. So that leaded me to establish that there was a research gap within the available research, which is primarily seeing that as there's some literature available, but it's mainly limited to the broad geographic region, so the world or the Europe, if we take our case. Therefore, I believe that to better have a perception of it and sustainability within the UK, we should just solely focus on the UK itself. And also, they do establish strong points talking about the economic and environmental impact, but they neglect to take a complete view of the sustainability stool, which is composed of 3 legs: environment, social, and economic. Therefore, if I'm being brief, the research will focus on the relationship between producers and consumer and see the influence they both play. Why did we decide to focus on both? Is because to have the most complete answer, I believe that understanding the consumer and the producer's perspective was key. So the method used in quick words is we decided to use a mixed methodology. So using quantitative methods for the survey, so collecting data from the population as it's a big group, while using more qualitative techniques, so interviews, semi-structured interviewed for the producers, as it is a more restrictive group of studied population. So this leads us to the results, and we'll start with we'll have one part talking about the survey result and one part talking about the interview result. The first thing is, as you can see through the graphs that are being illustrated, is we tried to be as broad as general and collect information from everybody from all over the UK, while in all age group, to make sure that we could be represent the UK population the best way possible. However, it has to be acknowledged that the sample size was relatively small to represent the UK population. This was mainly due to, since an MRes is a 1-year course, I was limited in my time span, but yeah. So now going more deeply into the detail. So we've established that on average, the UK consumer eats 3.2 vegetable, which is under the NHS recommendation of 5 vegetables a day. However, we can see that the vegetable consumption is broad, going from onion, carrots to cauliflower and courgette. However, we do see that the commonly found microgreens in vertical farming is not very consumed by the UK population, but this can be understood because it's commonly found in restaurant in dishes and not in the UK household. On the other part, what we can see is the element that influence the vegetable choice are primarily choice. What I mean by that is when you go to a supermarket, if you have only two vegetables to choose from, you choose by default or don't choose at all. While the broader the choice is, the more you're selective on what you take. Price and season are the two other that follow. Now going more into what we kind of know about locally and urban. So we see that the influence of local is greater than the influence of saying a product is produced urbanly. However, it is not because urban has a less influence than locally that the consumers neglected. You can see that there's people that oppose and have negative stance towards urban agriculture product is very little, with only 9% of the UK population. However, you can see that a great deal of the population has a neutral stance, so are not influenced or not against this method of production. Going more into controlled environment and vertical farming, we can see that the part of the UK population that believe they have knowledge towards this technique is quite great, with only 13% of the population acknowledging that they do not know what controlled environment or vertical farming is. And with that said, even though they do know a great deal about it, a great deal of UK population know about controlled environment and vertical farming, we still have 50% that when said it is vertically farmed product or controlled environment product are not influenced by it, so do not use this information to influence their choice. Going more into the interview results, so this was done by interviewing 5 different producers across the UK and asking them a series of predetermined questions, so they all underwent the same questionnaire. However, their response, of course, differed. From then, this data was then transcribed and put in vivo to identify themes, 5 key general group of themes, which are environment, economic, marketing, social, and the system in itself. However, even if all themes were always mentioned by all the producers, their importance and their, let's say, time span that the producers spent on explaining this particular theme differed, while you can there see that the environment and social theme were the 2 biggest one that came out. So this will lead us more to the discussion in itself and what we've discovered. So since this is a broad, there's a lot of data and it comes from surveys and interview. We'll first discuss the one we found through the interview in itself, the survey, sorry, and then we'll focus on the one found in the interview, and then we will combine the discussion and compare them to lead to the final discussion and then the conclusion of what we've been able to gather. Sorry. So the discussion for the survey is, like I said previously, we realized that there's only 3.2, the average of vegetable consumption is at 3.2 daily. This gives us the idea, the belief that we can still increase our vegetable consumption. Just to give you an idea of the validity of this data, the NHS average in 2018, 3.5. So even though our population sample was small, we still managed to get the same results as the NHS. However, we do see that there's a difference of influential factors among the vegetable choice. So, for example, we see that choice, price, and season were the 3 most common one, while a previous study do indicate that elements such as locally and origin of the product are commonly also found. However, the fact that our data differs from other literature does not necessarily mean it's wrong, because this is we're exploring a novel subject. It's relatively new. We can just assume that and it's 2020 and not 2018 like the other literature, the most earliest literature is based. We can say that the consumer's influence towards products changed through time. So once again, this is something that has to be acknowledged. On an economic perspective, so we can see that the importance of price is very important with 50%. And this has been, the importance of price for consumer has been backed by lots of literature. For example, a literature on vegetable consumption in New Zealand has indicated that 80% of the population is influenced by price. To be more on a geography term, the Eurobarometer has indicated that 76% of the Europe population, the UK population, sorry, is influenced by the price of this product. So this indicates that there's a strong influence by price in generally. Our numbers were at 51%, but this, once again, a 1996 studies indicates that their number were at 53%. So once again, it's something to acknowledge. Let's not forget that our population sample was only 355 people. And so we do acknowledge a 10% margin of error when stating any numbers. The issue with the survey, realized after it was done, is that we did not have any direct questions to ask about the environmental concerns, so explore in greater detail the environmental leg of sustainability. However, we can make assumptions through the previously asked question, and what we see is, even though season makes it a second, the economic factors and the choice factor are greater than the one that are concerned for environmental the environment, like season, locality, etc. So we can say that for a consumer's perspective, the majority of the consumer will tend to go to a product that is cheaper or available before it looks for a more environmental concern. Once again, this is a generality and not does not concern everybody, but it can be said. Discussing on the interview perspective, so what we found is that there's the social importance of the labeling. It has a mixed importance from the producer's perspective to the consumer. Some producers believe this adds benefit and adds value and information for the consumer, while others believe that this is an unnecessary task. This is once again led by the belief that for the producer that the consumer do not know about the production chain and how their food is produced. On a more economic perspective, so all producers mention the high investment that is required for vertical farming, and also the high cost that it elaborates, and therefore mention that their price is reflected because of that. So the higher price is because of the high investment, the high cost of production. The high cost of production, though, the reason believed for this differs from producers to producers. Some state is because controlled environment does not use the elements like sunshine and rainwater that is given for free to conventional agriculture, while other believe it's because it's the high energy costs that are required and the labor force. So this leads to the producers believing that their crop selection are based on two things. Some producers will choose their crops on the margin of profit they can establish from that crop, while other will focus on market opportunity. Thus, this makes the tool, the using of labels seen in the social concept, match the producer. For example, producers that use margin profit will commonly agree that labeling is interesting, as this will permit them to add value to their crop by stating that it's locally grown or grown in controlled environment, while producers that focus more on the market opportunity of a crop have the tendency to say that such labels do not add any value or are not required, because this makes it harder for them to integrate their crops within the marketing scheme of it. On the environmental side of things, producers believe their technology is the future, and if done correctly, will bring great environmental advantages. However, this is for the moment an ongoing investigation, I would say, with current literature saying that some of the method, if not done correctly, are more energy consumption and have a greater carbon footprint. But let's remember that vertical farming and controlled environment in itself is still in its infancy, and therefore will still evolve. And like mentioned by numerous producers, they are still looking at alternatives to make it as more eco-friendly as possible by incorporating solar panels and rainwater collection system to reduce the amount of input they require and therefore limit their carbon output. So in general, what have we established through this the combination of the two discussion? There's a clear indication of both of data that the environmental aspect of the product is not a driving force. Even the systems environmental aspect is still being debated, but however, we can see that the consumer from the survey and the interview if it's something that the consumer does acknowledge and know, but if other elements such as price, for example, are too great to have an eco-friendly product, it will be neglected. So environment is, let's say, in the back seat when it comes to producers from a consumer and a producer's perspective. However, the survey has indicated that the UK population believe they have knowledge regarding the vertical farming in CA, while producers, on the other hand, oppose to that and dispute this claim by saying that the UK population are not aware regarding where their food come from. And this is something that we can agree with, even though we have high media attention towards, especially during COVID, about where our food comes from and information regarding our food. We can agree to this. We kind of have to side with the producers, as it's commonly not known what's going on and where your food comes from, but also, once again, using the Eurobarometer study of 2017, we do see that the perception and the comprehension behind a label such as eco-label, locally grown, environmentally friendly, are not comprehended by the majority of the UK population, or just they do not know what the label means. And therefore, you have to understand that the producers therefore claim that the consumer do not know what anything about their food is extravagant, but it's not entirely true. This leads us to the economic element of this discussion is, since the high cost and high perception price for the producers, this has led us to two types of producers. One, like I said before, that focus on the margin and profit they can pull from a crop, and the other from the market opportunity. And this has led us to see that the economic pillar, even if only one leg of the stool, is the most important one, and the one that really will able for the vertical farming to be sustainable. Because if let's face it, if companies don't make money, they go bankrupt. But this has seen that the social conception that is behind vertical farming plays a great role in the importance of this pillar. So to rephrase this and bring it more in a nice and neat conclusion, in conclusion, the economic factor related to vertical farming to the farmer's perspective. In conclusion, the economic factor related to vertical farming from the perspective of both consumer and producer demonstrate that the economic pillar is the most important out of the three pillars of sustainability, as these factors determine the viability of the company and its capacity to maintain production. So like briefly said before, it is true that the economic factor is the most important, as if a company does not bring in enough money to cover all its liability, there's no potential of it being sustainable through time. However, like mentioned before, the importance of the economic factor is influenced by the social factor, as the consumer's perception of price and the reason why it's giving such a great importance of price influences the importance of the economic pillar. If all consumers now know why they're paying for their food such a great price, then the vertical farming business should be okay. And so to kind of rephrase it, although the discussion might be the biggest pillar might be the economic, that this economic is based on the social factor, as they've shown that they influence the business plan method. So to summarize up, the economic factor is the most important, but it cannot be neglected that the social pillar of sustainability influences this pillar greatly. The environmental one, however, is seen to be neglected from the consumer's perspective. However, it should not be acknowledged that it's neglected from the producer's perspective. And if you have any questions, once again, thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or comments and information I might have skimmed through too fast, please go to slidego.com, enter the code 23510, and I'll gladly answer all of them.
Great, thank you very much, Ben. And that's quite interesting. I like this, the picture of the stool where one of the legs is the price leg is like really long, so it's at a really funny angle, and the environment leg and the knowledge leg that were sort of at the wrong height. And sounds like maybe there's a way to sort of wedge in some knowledge, and the producer side of the environment leg is a bit longer than the consumer one. I'm wondering, like, do you have a feel for, well, it's kind of a two-part question. Do you have a feel for, is the market, so like you're saying, most people are influenced primarily by price, consumers.
Yes.
Is the market for those that are influenced primarily by environmental concerns and other things, do you feel like that's close to being saturated? And if so, how close does the price need to get before the environmental factors start to pull more people onto this side?
This is more on a personal belief. I don't believe that the environmental market is saturated, but as being a recent student, I know, for example, when I would go grocery shopping and being on a student budget, I would try to, as also I study agriculture, but we have a tendency to go for the cheapest. And once again, this can be reflected, and this is where I think my research has a limiting factor, is we did not acknowledge to take people's perception of incomes. So that would have maybe played a role to see who has more influence on, okay, it's important to grow locally. But I think if, let's say I have a carrot A that is grown conventional farming, loads of pesticide, but is at £1, and I have carrot B, and it's grown in vertical farming, very low carbon footprint, but it's at £2, I think the majority of the people will go for the £1 carrot. And if it's, let's say, 5 pence more expensive, so really close to the cheap carrot, then there might be a more tendency to be, okay, I'm willing to put this very little extra part to it. So I think it's establishing the correct price and the correct difference between price. I think, once again, is a very broad question, but I think it is interesting because, once again, you can't make a general statement saying if we put it at 5 pence more expensive, everybody will buy it, because it'll fluctuate depending to people's income, social pressure. But we have seen for example, we have seen a growth in the vegan and vegetarian movement, and also especially with I don't know if you had them in the UK, but in Belgium we had a lot of strikes for the environment lately, and this shows that the younger generation, and I'm not saying that the older generation is not involved, but the younger generation is starting to bring in this importance, and therefore I think the market is not saturated in itself. Just think it's a question of giving the right price for the right value, which is difficult for the producers because, especially in the vegetable department, there's very low margin when you sell to retailers and big supply chains. So I don't know if I answered the question. I completely drifted off.
I think it's a good answer around the question. I think you kind of did. Yeah, thanks. I suppose the way that producers are focusing on the environmental side the more they do that, the more the consumers will be prepared to pay more, perhaps. Because I know a lot of people are prepared to pay, £1.50 more for some peanut butter that doesn't have palm oil in it. So maybe
I think, once again, it's also for example, I'll take steak. I'm willing to pay a bit more for a very good steak. The cow has had good condition. And I think, once again, and a lot of the producers did mention this, and I think I should have mentioned more detail in the presentation, is for them, they're going back to the informing the public, not the way they produce, but the health benefit of, let's say, a non-fertilized carrot or onion or tomato or whatever, because I think it's something the population, and you see it more and more people, like I was a Cub Scout chief, and I had a little kid tell me, oh, so that's a cow, that's where milk comes from. So the detachment to where our food comes from is so great, and the health benefit from a good nutrition has drifted off. You see the NHS now putting a great importance on the 5-a-day vegetable, which I think will boost this. Okay, it's important to eat healthy, it's important to eat vegetable, and it'll translate in a healthier body, and therefore I'm willing to put more money into it. So I think, like, if I'm saying in general, I think the more we're educated between our food, and that the producers were clearly stating that a lot of them are trying to put that forward, the health benefit of eating healthy and vegetables and the impact it has on the environment. The more they do that, the more people are informed about the health benefit from their food, the more people you also see agree, okay, now I'm willing to put 1 extra pound complete for a healthier salad, of course.
Cool. Thank you. Right, I have quite a lot of questions from the audience here. At the top, we have a question. Will current producers or farmers feel that this new vertical farming could cannibalize their existing methods? So is there a threat to conventional farmers?
So once again, I do not think so. And like mentioned by one of the producers, is vertical farming technology is in its infancy, so it still has to grow. Like a lot of literature also states, it's a technology that's been, I would say, has started to make headways in the early 2000s, and is, especially now with COVID and food scare, has grown. However, so for conventional farmers, hydroponics have been used, for example, for ages now. I spoke to one producers, and I was also astonished by myself that he was using the so I knew he was using vertical technology, but it was hydroponic, and he knew a lot of other producers that do so. So controlled environment agriculture, I don't think is already present without us knowing. In addition, I think it will impact some of the conventional agriculture, as, let's say, if I'm producing cucumbers, they can be grown through vertical production, but crops such as wheat and all grain crops aren't there yet in the vertical and controlled environment technology. So the way I see it, and a lot of producers see it, and that's why it's important to focus on market opportunity for crops, is, for me, it's simple. You have conventional agriculture that is struggling to produce enough food for the population, and vertical farming and controlled agriculture will come and complement it. It'll be like this oxygen mask to agriculture. So it won't replace it. It'll give competition for certain crop, while other won't be impacted. But yeah, it'll be kind of it will able to meet the demands, I would say, the growing demands. It will complement conventional agriculture. That is my personal vision of what it could bring to the table.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. It's going to be a very long time before any conventional farming is under threat from this, I think. Right. Another question. Can urban agriculture be standardized or regulated? Will produce quality differ from location to location? And could this lead to differing views and consumer adoption?
So, like I said, I briefly mentioned, urban agriculture is a very broad term. And therefore, if you use, for example, more allotment farming, then yes, the quality of your product will depend from where you're located, because it'll vary from soil. The beauty of controlled environment is you control the nutrients, the light, the air, everything that is involved in your crop production. So if you know that if you give your plant, let's say, a lot of nitrate, it gives it a sweet taste. I am completely inventing something, so don't take my word for gold. But if I give my salad lots of nitrate, it gives it this very sweet taste. We will have the database saying, okay, if we put this amount of nitrate within the water, it gives a sweet taste. We can also say it has light for 7 hours and 35 minutes and 25 seconds, so that can be replicated throughout. And so I think the recipes for let's say a sweet salad, a bitter salad, will be replicated. And it's like conventional agriculture. If you take one field, the tomato at one start of the field it tastes exactly like the one at the other end. So I think you'll still have that slight variant, but it wouldn't be great enough to see difference. So I think the beauty of controlled environment will allow it, regardless of where you implement it. If you have the same recipe that's used, let's say, in India and in the UK, since you're in controlled environment, everything is controlled and it's the same environment. And therefore, you'll have more or less the standardized salad from this kind of production. That is personally my vision on the matter, and I think that's the greatness of controlled environment and vertical farming, is it allows you to replicate what you're producing.
Absolutely, that's one of the most exciting things about this technology. I think we actually we have a webinar in November. Hopefully, it's being prepared at the moment about the lighting side of the climate recipe. So stay tuned to the events page for that, because that could be very interesting. Right, next question. Is consumer sentiment enough to understand the real view of the consumer itself? Is vertical farming actually possible for consumers on a longer time horizon? I mean, well.
So if I understand this question correctly, and if I don't, I'm very sorry. But so yeah, I think, like mentioned before, for vertical farming to prosper is for the consumer, so everybody, to understand what it brings to the table, and the good and the bad. And I think, therefore, it's going to require a great deal of information. If you look conventional farming, the reason that everybody used to understand it is because there was no other ways. You take back in the Middle Age, is you produce your crop, you would know how to produce them, and so everybody acknowledged that as the only way to produce food. Then when you just take, for example, land rotation, the land tilling, all that, it took a time to adapt as like, oh, this is a way we can produce food better with more efficiency. So I think and the consumers knew it. So for example, I don't know, because I never lived in the Middle Ages and I wasn't born yet, but I think you take just the invention of the wheel, it revolutionized everything, but also agriculture. And so that, adding to the wheel, the consumer were like, well, why are they claiming it takes 4 days to tilt 1 meter of my field? They can just use a wheel that does it. And so I think the fact that the technology used by controlled environment farming and vertical farming itself is still in its infancy, and it's still growing to the public. A lot of the consumers are like, I kind of don't know it yet. I might not be as interested. Well, while it'll take time, but as soon as it gets known and it's a common occurrence, like if I would buy a tomato, I'd be like, instead of saying, is it bio or is it normal, I'd be like, is it conventional or controlled environment? That it'll take time, but as soon as for me, I believe it can be implemented within the consumer. I did not understand the question very well, so I hope I answered it.
I think I understand. I think, like, given that the sort of the knowledge pillar is still relatively small in your model, then I suppose the question is, does that mean by asking a lot of consumers their opinions, how much does that really know? I mean, you have this great big neutral in the middle of the graph, and how much of that neutral is because of ignorance, and how much of that neutral is because people really don't mind?
So to go back to that, is when we saw how many people said they knew about controlled environment and vertical farming, I think it was very few said they did not know about it. I think it was 13%. So, and once again, normally that should not have affected the outcome of the survey and the data collected. However, there is probably a part of ignorance and people saying, I've heard of it, so I know it, and clicked on, I know some of it. So yeah, and that is why, once again, no research is perfect, and we've acknowledged that there might be a margin of errors in the data. But I think, yes, it could have affected the data, but compared with previous literature that's been published, I think the data I have uncovered or discovered or found is backed a lot by previous literature explaining social, economic, and environmental aspects. So I think in general, the research was not too much impacted by misknowledge.
Okay. On that theme of lack of knowledge, the next question, and you spoke a little bit about labeling and things. So yeah, how would you recommend that the public becomes better informed, labeling it and other things?
So I think a research that was really interesting is the Eurobarometer, which basically was focusing on did a research that focused on the eco label and the impact it has on consumer all across Europe. And so it focused in each country, interviewed a set amount of people, and then had feedback. And what you can see is a lot of people don't understand the labels, or since there's so many, just don't know which one means what. For example, I take my scenario when I go down to buy my Carrefour, my down the street Carrefour. I have some products have the eco label, some product have a bio label, some product, and so there's such a great deal of label that it makes it complicated to understand what it is. And like a producer mentioned, if a person does not know what vertical farming is and how it's done and what it contributes to, using a label saying vertical farm product might not mean anything to him, and just then not bring his interest towards to focus more on the local, bio, and organic labels. I think the problem is, since there's such a diversity of it, it should be more standardized. And I think that's what Europe was trying to do with the eco label. But for a retailer's perspective, a producer's perspective, it's a step less to just say, okay, it's Carrefour bio, it's Little bio, it's Aldi bio, it's not general bio. And I think this broadness of label is a great debate. Shall we have a standardized worldwide, which once again will generate loads of debate across the world? What is bio for who and for what, even if there's some pretty clear definition. But yeah, so more on the labeling. Like said, some producers use it as an added value tool because they clearly mention we produce locally, so you're buying local products, and therefore believe that it adds value, and that kind of limits their who they're targeting. If I say it's locally produced and I sell it for more, so if I believe it's a pound extra, and the only people that will buy it is somebody that will understand that label. So it's kind of a give and take. If people understand it, then you get more customer. If people don't understand it, you might lose customer. But an issue is, the standardizing those labels will help greatly to promote in itself vertical farming afterwards. So first they need to standardize and say, okay, you can't put Belgium produced in Wallonia. You have to put this local label, and it can only be done if your product are sold in this region. So yeah, the standardizing of the labels is a key factor that has to be done.
Yeah, I think it has been a debate for a few years in the industry, and I don't really know myself where it's at yet. But hopefully, I guess it's just the Wild West at the moment, and it'll kind of slim down maybe over time. All right, we've got time for a few more. Okay, here's an interesting one. Do you think a growing nationalistic sentiment from, well, in the UK context, you've got like the Brexit and the trade pressures and the possible increasing of import taxes or lack of trade deals. Do you think that nationalistic sentiment will allow vertical farming to proliferate? Do you think it will give it a boost? And it can probably happen in all countries given the trade problems we've seen with the pandemic.
So I personally think yes and no. Now you can see this is a stupid answer, but yes, because the UK will then focus on establishing food security, which is a key element, and you see it in a lot of the UK's government paper. It's something that they've been, even before Brexit, trying to establishing food security. And that is for all countries. Every country wants to be sustainable in itself, make sure they're able to feed their population. And once again, the UK have the disadvantage or an advantage, who knows, of being an island, and therefore they're limited in space-wise. So I think the inclusion of vertical farming will be seen as something very beneficial. They'll be able to grow vertically and therefore be limitless in the capacity they're able to produce. Well, if they can stick with conventional farming, they might be limited as they run out of space. On a more general scale, I think it's not Brexit that's going to be pushing or the nationalist I didn't quite understand that word, but it's not Brexit or any big decision like that that's going to be pushing vertical farming, as food security is on everybody's mind, especially with COVID right now. We've seen supermarket and people struggle to get the food. So I think reducing the producing within the country and ensuring this food security is now on everybody's mind. And vertical farming is a way to produce as much food as locally as possible. So I think it's something that COVID would have more encouraged than any political decision. Once again, it's always good to have the politicians support for example, all the permits and etc. so you can build. But I think COVID was a greater influence on the propaganda, the spread of vertical farming than Brexit.
Yeah, COVID has accelerated a lot of things, hasn't it? But yeah, maybe taking advantage of some nationalistic sentiment can help the process.
No, once again, I believe it will help. It will accelerate, but it won't be the main motor pushing the boat towards it accelerating, going faster.
Cool, thanks. Right, this one says, "Hi Benjamin, have you done any studies on the increasing plant content of ready meals?" And also that this person would like to see the vegetable consumption graph again.
Yeah, so no worry. So no, I have not done any studies regarding the vegetable increase in ready meals. So no, I have not. Sorry.
Cool. Well, I guess we'll just leave that graph up and it can be absorbed. It is quite interesting looking at that.
So for people wondering so this was an online survey. So they had the list of vegetable was established through previous Mintel study indicating the most consumed vegetable within the UK. You see that there's mushroom present, which is a fungi and not a vegetable. It's because for some reason Mintel also included this. So this was done with Mintel previous study. So that the list was established like that. We did add the other option where people could type in as much vegetable, and they were counted as, but as no one exceeded any of the others, they were not mentioned which vegetable they were. I think there was beans, which I was surprised, especially in the UK, did not make it as great.
Yeah, I was just looking at that. Interesting. Carrots are very high.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. We'll finish at about 5:02, so a couple more questions. Do you imagine opinions on sustainability of urban agriculture differ between people living in rural areas and those living in urban areas?
So for anybody that know where Harper Adam is, it's in the middle of the rural area. It's very surrounded by fields. So of course, when I was talking about urban agriculture, a lot of and it's an agricultural school, I forgot to mention, sorry. A lot of the people are more for conventional farming, etc. So I think the opinion on depending if you're from a rural area or an urban area will of course vary greatly. For example, if I personally live in a more rural area, so for me, when we mentioned that we're running out of space to put fields in, it always makes my mind boggle, like, well, we've got plenty of space right here, let's just move that patch of grass and make a field. So I think, of course, I do not really think like that, but I think this can influence us. We usually make assumption on what we see before reading into it. And so I think the fact that you live in a more rural area, you have, and I do not want to be mean to anybody, but you'll probably be, well, urban agriculture seems to be pointless as we've got plenty of space left here. And I think if I change the slide, so this was illustrating the stance towards urban agriculture. You see that there's a lot of people that are neutral, which is very common. People sometimes don't like to give their opinion, but very few people are opposed to urban agriculture. So I think if you're from a rural area and you hear that there's this vertical farm that's starting in the middle of London, and let's say you're from Harper and you live in the field close to Harper, you might be opposed to it, but I don't think you'll share a great deal of importance to the fact that they're producing a vertical farm in London, as for you, it does not impact you directly. And I think once again is, as long as our values or our opinions are not being attacked, people don't naturally care. If I don't know if it's said correctly, and I do not want to offend anyone, but yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Makes sense. Cool. Okay, next question. Can you comment at all on the evidence of carbon footprint of vertical farming as it currently is done and versus traditional farming in the UK?
So I cannot comment personally because I have not studied the carbon footprint, but from what I've read on literature is it seems to be, depending on how vertical farming is done, it can have a greater carbon footprint. But that is, once again, that's what I have read. So I cannot make a greater comment on it because I have read case studies saying they have a smaller, some saying the opposite. And that's why I mentioned it's an ongoing debate. And once again, I do think it's something that changes a lot depending on where you're located. So it should be done by case study. Unfortunately, I did not do one because once again, I was limited time-wise, but it is an interesting question. And if you're curious, I'm sure you can find case studies talking about your region more precisely. For example, I know that they did one for a vertical farm in Denmark, and they showed that if they use solar panel and rainwater, they have more or less the same carbon footprint as conventional agriculture. Once again, it depends which conventional agriculture are you doing. Are you doing a heavy industrial one or one that uses no pesticides, everything's done or mainly by hand with very little machinery? It's the comparison in itself is a very difficult element, as one conventional farming can differ from the other, while one vertical farm can differ from another as how the inputs are managed.
Yeah, I know some strawberry farmers around here in Perthshire, where they're heating their strawberries in polytunnels so they can grow later into the year. So yeah, like you say, varies a lot. We've just had an interesting point from Diana on the chat saying a recent study identified that urban property prices increase 7% if it's located near an urban farm. That's not to do with energy, but it's quite interesting. It shows that the public are, it's leaking into it's influencing other aspects of economic life, which is very interesting. Right, one last question. It's the one at the top, so sorry if you didn't get your questions answered. The last question is, the question of price raises the issue of true cost. Do you find that consumers were aware of the true cost concept? So this actually ties in with the energy thing. So the true cost accounting, the sustainability, and even the social aspect as well. Are people aware of that?
I think not really. So talking with one of the producers, it's he was saying, yeah, depending on, so they were selling to a retailer and it's done by, I think he was telling me 6 months contracts, and he was saying sometimes we make 1 cent on the dollar, so very, very, very low margin because our cost due to the season has increased or due to the input that were required. So and the thing is, people when they go to the supermarket, if they buy that, I'll take for example Asda. When I was going to Asda, I was always buying the pack of 6 for $1 for 6 apples. And I think people just figure that production costs are always constant and have no idea how elevated they are and how they can fluctuate. So I think, like, for example, if I take my case, I'd be like, if I see my apple go from 1 to 150, I'd just be, whoa, how come? Is it Asda trying to pull a bigger margin on it? What's going on? And I would not necessarily think that it's the production cost that fluctuated. And I think the issue when you're like this, a big vertical farm, and you try to sell in grand quantity, is you have to meet the demand of who's buying them. You can't sell 2 tons of apples to people. It's too little transaction, and you might not make it out. While you can sell your 2 tons to a supermarket and they'll buy it, but you have to include that they'll take the margin and they'll buy it for the cheapest price possible. While you might have produced your crop. It has a little bit, his shell life is limited, so you might have to pull a smaller margin. So in general, I think consumer always believe it's the price that's on the shelf are, once again, it's in general, consumer believe the price on the shelf are fixed. They're not going to move. And if they move, it's not because it's because the supermarket wants to build a bigger margin. While if people would buy directly to farmers or have that kind of sort of transaction, they'll see their price fluctuate because, well, this month was more expensive, and then they'll be okay. I know I'm paying more, so the farmer can have the same profit in itself, which keeps the survival of the company while he can cover all his costs. So I think no, consumers are not aware of the actual cost it costs to produce and how stressful it is then for producers to sell their product.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Benjamin, very much. Thank you, everyone, for the questions and for turning up. Thank you for sticking with us through the hour. The next webinar, we've got a couple of weeks off. The next one is on the 16th of October, I believe. The precise details are to be confirmed, but it is another sort of a social science type study of a similar vein to this. So hopefully see you all then. Keep your eyes on UKUAT.org/events for that one and ones coming afterwards. And yeah, once again, thanks very much, Ben. And
if you have any further question and I did not answer them, you can contact me via mail. I did not put it, so I'll put it in the chat, and I'll try greatly to answer all your question as soon as possible.